Pete Hegseth as the next leader of the Pentagon. Hegseth is a military veteran who served with the Army National Guard. In a statement, Trump described Hegseth as, quote, tough, smart, and a true believer in America first. During an interview on a podcast just last week, Hegseth criticized what he called woke policies in the military and said that women should not be allowed to serve in combat.
There's a chance to course correct it, but it would take the new Trump administration going after it really hard.
How would they correct it?
Well, first of all, you got to fire. You got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you got to fire this. I mean, obviously, you're going to bring in a new Secretary of Defense, but any general that was involved, general, admiral, whatever that was involved in any of the DEI woke, it's got to go. Either you're in for war fighting, and that's it, and that's the only litmus test we care about. You got to get DEI and CRT out of military academies, so you're not training young officers to be baptized in this type of thinking. And then, whatever the standards, whatever the combat standards were, say, in, 1995, let's just make those the standards. I think a huge one is women in combat and quotas. I think the way they pushed that under Obama in a way that had zero to do with efficacy, zero to do with lethality and capability.
You don't like women in combat?
No.
Why not?
I love women service members who contribute amazingly because everything about men and women serving together makes the situation more complicated, and complication in combat means casualties are worse.
So, Willie, obviously a lot of concern among Democrats, among some Republicans, but this obviously is going to be, I think I saw Jake Sherman say yesterday, this might be the biggest challenge of any pick so far to get through, only because obviously, as Adam Smith said before, the Pentagon is a massive bureaucracy. I served 4 terms on the Armed Services Committee, and I can tell you that even the most experienced general, admiral, CEO that went into the Pentagon got spun around in circles. It's a lot easier to say what you're going to do on a podcast than it is when you're actually over at the Pentagon. And people that think that generals and admirals that have given their entire life to this country are going to just roll over is a serious misreading of the Pentagon. But we'll see what happens. I mean, people will see what he says when he's in front of the Senate. We'll see what we hear in the coming days and weeks. And as Adam Smith said, judge him by what he says then.
Yeah, we heard some Republicans not critical of the pick openly, but wondering about the pick, saying some of the Republicans now saying, I don't even know who he is. But I think it's very telling that they're not coming out publicly and criticizing it. That's the power of Trump. These men and women in the Senate, these men and women in the House don't want to cross him. They believe he is swept in with a mandate, and whatever he does, we'll see how they vote. We'll see the questions they pose when, as you say, when it comes down to confirmation time. But at least publicly, we're not hearing Republicans critical of this choice, which, to put it mildly, surprised a lot of people, not just in Washington, but across the country. Let's bring in NBC News national security editor David Rowe. David, good morning. What reaction are you hearing to this, at least nomination to be Secretary of Defense?
It is a surprise, and I think as clips like the one that you played come out, it's going to raise major issues. There are women in combat. Women who engage in ground combat have to take physical tests. Can they pick up and carry another soldier who's wounded is one of them. And most of all, there are very large numbers of women who are combat pilots, very experienced ones. And so, again, I think, he should have his hearings and he should, talk through these ideas, but they're more, I guess, talking points, political talking points, versus the concrete realities of these policies. So it is a surprise. There's been good, I think, picks that are more centrist, like Marco Rubio, that have been, I think, seen in a positive light by national security experts. But this one is definitely a surprise.
And this pick comes, and we should note, it comes just hours after important reporting from the Wall Street Journal that says the Trump transition team is considering a draft executive order to establish a warrior board, their words, of retired senior military personnel with the power to review 3- and 4-star officers and recommend that they be deemed unfit for leadership, mostly over their support for DEI and woke policies. Per this reporting, this would allow Trump, who can fire anyone he wants as commander-in-chief, but this allows him, this advisory board, to give him cover to do so and potentially remake senior levels of the Pentagon. And Jackie, Pete Hegseth's appointment would be a part of that if he does indeed lead the DOD. He is someone, as we just rolled through some of his comments about women in combat. Just now, we played a clip there. He spoke at CPAC. I mean, he's a very political figure here, a partisan figure in his Fox News perch. So let's talk about the possibility that this might be the pick that Republicans do have some questions about. Republicans in the Senate likely a rubber stamp for most of Trump's nominations, but this one might be different. How do you see it play out?
Yeah, I mean, historically, we've seen Congress give a lot of deference to presidents when it comes to confirming their cabinet. There have been some blowout and dramatic fights, though, and I think that Pete Hegseth could be that rare fight for Senate Republicans. But as we've talked about, the past few months, the lack of dissenters in Senate is perhaps troubling for any sort of pushback to someone like Hegseth, who, as you noted, has 20 years of service in the military, 2 Bronze Stars, but has zero experience when it comes to actually navigating a bureaucracy or serving in the Defense Department and overseeing the world's most powerful and largest military. I think that this is going to be the first test of who ultimately stands up to Trump. We were just talking about how Trump has gotten involved in all of these battles that traditionally president-elects have not gotten involved in, such as picking the Senate majority leader, weighing in and essentially ushering and facilitating this media campaign and a Make America Great campaign to try to tap someone like Rick Scott, who would then be expected to implement something like recess appointments, which would allow Trump to take this expansive approach to executive authority and presidential power and allow him to usurp the Senate in order to make someone what they would call a recess appointee. So essentially, they would serve in the job for a year without formal Senate confirmation, where it only takes a simple majority to push someone through, like Pete Hegseth. But if you have people like, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, there are a few people left who are going to put up a fight. People who are not isolationists, I don't know if I'd necessarily call them interventionists, but people who certainly wouldn't support comments Pete Hegseth has made in the past and positions he's taken, such as being one of the leading forces, we shouldn't forget this, who lobbied Trump to pardon war criminals.
So, David Rohde, let's expand this out and this will be the last question because we have so many picks to get to. It was quite a very busy day yesterday in Mar-a-Lago. So for people out there saying, well, Donald Trump will be able to get whoever he wants through the Senate, and then they can go and have what Republicans would call a witch hunt and go around and pick generals that they want to fire and just get rid of them. Again, a curious your thought. I think it's a dangerous misreading of the Pentagon. Because if you start going through and firing generals for political reasons, there is a general feeling an attack on one is an attack on all. And I suspect that would cause a great deal of problems. So when I started saying that they're going to have a board to go through and fire generals, fire admirals that they didn't like, I again thought it's just not that easy. It's just the Pentagon and the United States military is set apart, and they are not going to bend to the will of anyone who they believe is issuing unconstitutional orders.
That's true, and that's because lives are at stake here. You want the best possible commander leading American forces when they go into combat. And the broader question, and we've talked about this before, and we'll talk about it again. As a national security editor, we're going to look at all these national security agencies, and the question is, will Donald Trump try to politicize them? So will he be picking and choosing, leaders, generals, what this committee appears to do, for people who support him politically? And again, the Pentagon is the starkest example of that. Again, you want the best possible military leader, not the most loyal one, leading our, all of our military members into combat. And then you'll see the same thing at the CIA. You need the best, spying, but also analysis of Russia and China, possible the biggest threats we face. At the Justice Department and the FBI, you want the best possible law enforcement officials, countering threats in the United States. So that's going to be the broad dynamic here in the narrative is, are these experts, or are they political loyalists who are in these critical national security agencies?
So let's talk about the CIA. President-elect Trump has named John Ratcliffe as his pick for CIA director. The former Republican congressman from Texas served as director of national intelligence in Trump's first administration. The first attempt to install him in 2019 failed after he removed himself from consideration following reports he appeared to misrepresent his career as a federal prosecutor in Texas. Donald Trump also selected South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem to lead the Department of Homeland Security, praising her as a statement for being very strong on border security. Noem has no significant experience with Homeland Security issues, but has supported Trump's hardline immigration policy. She also defended fellow Republican governors in their efforts to crack down on migrants in their states. Sam, let's go back to CIA, and then we can get to Governor Noem in a second. John Ratcliffe, a guy very familiar to Donald Trump, had worked with him, as I said, in the first administration, a former Republican congressman. What's the sense on the Hill of what kind of CIA director he'd be?
I mean, he's one of these picks that, by virtue of having been there in the first term, will probably sail through confirmation. People are familiar with him. There's no immediately red flags like there were the first time around because of the misrepresentation that you talked about. Same with Noem to a degree. The real one, obviously, as we were just talking about, is Pete Hegseth, where people are just sort of dumbfounded by it. I'm sort of amazed by how staid the conversation has been to this point about Hegseth, because if we're being frank about it, the reason he is picked is because he's on Fox and Friends, right? And this is true of a number of these picks, right? Mike Walls also happened to be the congressman who had appeared on Fox more than any other sitting Republican member of Congress in the past 2 years. These people grab Trump's attention because of their television appearances. He's drawn to the idea that they can present on a medium that he loves. Contemporaneous reporting, I should say reporting from last night, suggests that the Hegseth decision was done in a matter of 24 hours, that there's internal confusion about it. Similarly with Noem a little bit, people are wondering what kind of credentials she has to run DHS, which also we should note oversees FEMA response and can help with that. So, there's some confusion about this, but I think we're getting to the main point, which is that this is Trump. Right? People have come to internalize the idea that he's going to choose people, not necessarily based on credentials, but based on their ability to handle television interviews and on their personal loyalty to them. And I think with the Hegseth thing, and sorry to keep going back here, but I just think it's the most controversial one, is that they've been pretty much clear about their desire to use the military domestically. Right? I mean, this was an issue in the first term where they wanted to put down some of the protests happening in Lafayette Square. They used the military. It was a problem for the military leaders at the time. They didn't realize they were being co-opted in that way. Obviously, military officials spoke out against Trump after the fact. I think he looks at this and says, you know what, I don't want to deal with that again. And so find the most, the biggest sycophant that he can find to serve as defense secretary and see if you can jam it through the Senate.